She promised herself she would not beg. She had said it out loud that morning, standing at the bathroom mirror, with concealer hiding what 3 sleepless nights had done to her face. You are your father's daughter. You do not break. You do not beg. She begged. Please. Her voice cracked on the single syllable, just barely, just enough. 24 hours. That is all I need. 24 hours and every account clears. The rain was needling the glass so hard she almost didn't hear the man on the other end laugh. Not a loud laugh. Not even a mean one. The kind of laugh that meant the answer was already no before she dialed. The kind of laugh that meant they had already won, and they wanted her to know it, and they wanted her to feel it, and they were enjoying making her stand here, in a $700 dress, begging a man who had already decided to bury her father's name. She pressed her free hand flat against the cold window. Her father built this company, with 23 years of his life. 23 years of 5 a.m. mornings, and skipped dinners, and promises to her mother that things would ease up soon. He had died before things eased up. He had died and left it all to her, and she had held it, and fought for it, and bled for it. And she was not. She was not going to be the one who let it collapse into the hands of men who never built a single thing in their lives. 24 hours? She said again, steadier this time. Please. She did not hear the door open behind her. She did not hear his footsteps. What she felt was the air change, the specific, particular silence that followed Jang Woo everywhere. The kind of silence that had no softness in it. That was the opposite of empty. That was a held breath with teeth. She saw him in the glass before she could turn. Black suit, white shirt, collar open, a tattoo climbing toward his jaw like something dark that had tried to stay hidden and given up. His face was composed the way marble is composed, beautiful, cold, carved into something that would outlast everything around it. He was looking at her reflection. She was looking at his. Neither of them moved. Her heart dropped 6 floors. How long had he been standing there? How much had he heard? She ran the last 30 seconds back in her head, please. 24 hours. Every account clears, and felt something cold move through her chest that had nothing to do with the rain against the glass. She smiled. Automatic. Professional. A woman closing a routine business call. Understood, she said into the phone. I'll be in touch. She hung up. The room was so quiet she could hear the city breathing 9 floors below them. Jang Woo did not ask who she was talking to. He did not ask what she needed 24 hours for. He did not ask anything. He simply looked at her, the way he had always looked at her, with a completeness that she had mistaken for love, and was only now beginning to understand, was something older than love. Something that had a contract attached to it that she had never been shown. And then he crossed to the side table, picked up his own phone, and typed something with one thumb. He pressed send. He set the phone face down. He walked back out of the room, and Alicia stood at the window alone, her reflection staring back at her. Her company dying by the hour. Her marriage a house of rooms she had never been allowed to open, and somewhere across the city. A man received a single text from a number he would spend the rest of the week wishing he had never seen. The text said one word. Now. Before we go any further, like this video, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love seeing this community show up from across the world. Every single like keeps this story going. So take a breath and hold it. Let's begin. He sat in the dark for 11 minutes after he left her standing at the window. Not because he needed to think. Jang Woo had made the decision the moment he saw her hand pressed flat against the glass. That particular posture, the one people wore when they were the only thing standing between something precious and the ground. He knew that posture. He had worn it himself, once, a long time ago, in a different life, that this one had been built on top of. He sat in the dark because he needed the decision to settle into his bones before he moved. Because once he moved, There was no version of this that ended quietly. He pulled out the secondary phone, not the one Alicia knew about, not the one that received board meeting invitations and quarterly reports, and typed 4 words to a number that had no name attached to it. Find the call's origin. The response came in 6 minutes. It would have come faster, but his people were careful, and careful took slightly longer than reckless, and that was exactly why they were still alive. He had a name, 2 shell company registrations, a Cayman Islands account number, and the home address of the man who had laughed at his wife by 7 minutes past the hour. He set the phone down on the desk. He thought about Alicia's voice through the glass, the way it had fractured on please, and then sealed itself back up like she could undo the sound through sheer will. She couldn't. He had heard it. He had filed it somewhere in the part of him that kept permanent records, the part that did not forget and did not forgive, and had learned, over 20 years, to be extraordinarily patient about both. He picked the phone back up. Soft perimeter. Unmarked. Don't let her see it. Then, 3 minutes later, flag everything registered under Vantage Credit Solutions and its subsidiaries. Regulatory tripwires. I want their liquidity frozen at the first technical opportunity. Don't make it look like anything. Make it look like paperwork. Because that was the thing about a ghost war, it didn't announce itself. It arrived as a delayed audit, a courier who took a wrong turn, a banking system glitch that nobody could trace to a single point of origin. It arrived as inconvenience stacked on inconvenience until inconvenience became a crisis, and the men who had been so comfortable laughing suddenly found themselves fielding calls from nervous partners and confused accountants and regulators who had received, from an anonymous source, a very interesting set of documents. He didn't touch her company. He didn't touch her. He built a wall around her, invisible and without seams, and he began dismantling her enemies from the outside in. She had always been a good actress at dinner. This was a skill she had learned at 12, watching her father come home from meetings that had gone badly and compose himself at the threshold before walking in the deliberate squaring of shoulders, the reset of expression, the choice to bring warmth into the room rather than deposit the day's damage on the people inside it. She had inherited the discipline, if not the ease, and by the time she was an adult, it was reflexive. Bright eyes, bright laugh, present in the body even when the mind was somewhere else entirely, doing math, running timelines, calculating how many days before the next call came. Her phone vibrated against her thigh. She laughed at something the dinner guest across from her said. She didn't catch what it was. She laughed anyway, the right amount, the right pitch, and reached for her wine glass with a hand that she kept perfectly still by conscious effort. Across the table, Jangwoo was talking to the guest's wife about something architectural, a building in Oslo, a particular quality of light in Scandinavian winter, and he was not looking at Alicia. Except he was. She could feel it the way you feel a change in air pressure, the way your skin registers weather before your mind names it. Her phone vibrated again. She excused herself with a smile and read in the hallway with her back against the wall and her heart doing something ugly in her chest. 48 hours, Mrs. CO. After that, we stopped being polite about it. She typed back, I understand. I'm working on it. She put the phone in her clutch and walked back to the table. Jangwoo had poured her wine without being asked. She sat down, picked up the glass, and looked up to find him watching her with that complete, unreadable attention that she had never fully learned to meet. Something pressed against the back of her hand beneath the table. She looked down. A folded napkin. His handwriting, small and precise. Switch phones. Trust me. She read it twice. She refolded it along the original crease and set it beside her plate. She smiled at him across the rim of her glass. She did not switch phones. She did not know, because she could not have known, that he had already read every message on her current one. On Tuesday, the man who had laughed stopped laughing. He found the audit notice on a Tuesday. It came from 3 different regulatory bodies simultaneously, which was unusual enough that he called his compliance attorney immediately. And his compliance attorney told him it was probably clerical overlapping flags from a shared database. Nothing that couldn't be resolved in a few weeks with the right paperwork. He believed this because he wanted to believe it. Because the alternative required him to believe that someone had specifically targeted him, and that thought led to other thoughts he preferred not to have. The courier never arrived on Wednesday. This mattered more than the audit, because the courier was carrying documents, not the kind of documents that moved through official channels. The other kind. The kind that certain arrangements depended on, and when the courier didn't arrive, and didn't answer his phone, and wasn't at his registered address, the man who had laughed made 4 phone calls in rapid succession and got silence on 2 of them, and careful, measured non-answers on the other 2. He drove home that night with his hands too tight on the wheel. He found the photograph taped to the inside of his car door. Not the exterior, the interior, which meant someone had been inside his car, which meant someone had his key or had bypassed his key, which meant this was not a coincidence or a clerical error or an overlapping database flag. The photograph was of his family, his wife at her sister's birthday dinner 2 weeks ago, his daughter at her Wednesday swimming lesson, his son walking to school. No note, no demands, no name, just, "We see you," written in the margin in an ordinary blue pen. He sat in the parking garage for a long time. Then he called the man above him and made the first of what would become many mistakes. He told the truth about how frightened he was, which told the people who were listening to his phone exactly how much damage had already been done. She found it on a Thursday morning when Jang Woo was at a board meeting that ran 2 hours longer than scheduled. She had come to his office looking for the Vantage credit file. She knew he had a copy. She had seen him with it. And after 3 days of her own legal team moving with the speed of cold water, she was done waiting for permission. The desk was clean. The drawers were locked, except the top one. She tried the letter opener on the 2nd and 3rd, the way her father had taught her to open his desk when she was 9, and he wanted to teach her that most locks weren't as serious as they looked. The 4th drawer had a false bottom. She was not expecting that. She sat back on her heels and looked at it for a moment, at the shallow wooden compartment beneath the compartment, and she understood that she was at the kind of threshold that you cannot uncross. Whatever was in there would change the specific shape of what she knew. She opened it. The contract was folded in thirds, the paper heavy and slightly yellowed at the edges. It had been signed in ink that was darker than ordinary ink, almost brown, the color that certain things become when they dry. Her father's signature was at the bottom. She would have recognized it anywhere. She had seen it on birthday cards and legal documents and the framed letter he kept above his office door that said, "What you protect defines you." Beside it, Jang Woo's. She read the document 3 times, because once was not enough, and twice was not enough. And by the 3rd time, her hands had stopped shaking, not because she was calm, but because she had passed through shock and arrived somewhere colder on the other side. She was sitting in his chair, with the contract on the desk in front of her, when he walked in. The air changed. She looked up. He stood in the doorway in the way he always stood still, complete, nothing telegraphed, and looked at the contract, and then at her. And she watched something move through his expression that he almost managed to keep from the surface. "Your father saved my life," he said. His voice was even. It was the voice he used when he was choosing every word before it left him. I was 26. It was not a situation I could have survived alone. He pulled me out of it. He asked for nothing. I owed him protection. She waited. I owe you more. She looked down at the contract, then back up at him. How much of our marriage was real? She asked. He held her gaze. All of it. It was the truest lie she had ever been told. She could hear the truth in it, and the shape of what was missing from it at the same time. And she understood that she was not going to get the rest of the answer today. And she also understood that the man standing in the doorway had spent the last several days quietly going to war on her behalf. And she did not know what to do with either of those things simultaneously. She folded the contract back along its original lines and set it on the desk between them. She walked out without another word. He did not stop her. The money trail took 4 days. Jiang Wu did not sleep much during those 4 days. He worked through the night on the second and third, cross-referencing account flows against the shell company registrations his team had already flagged. And on the morning of the 4th day, he sat with his elbows on the desk and a number on the screen in front of him, and felt something that was not quite anger and not quite grief, and was worse than both. It had been disguised as debt service payments. Extraordinarily well disguised, the kind of work that required intimate knowledge of the company's internal systems, the kind of knowledge that only came from the inside. Someone had built a siphon into the company's financial architecture and routed it outward through 3 intermediary accounts before it landed, in irregular deposits that were carefully calibrated to avoid automatic flagging, in a series of accounts registered under a name that Jiang Wu recognized. He recognized it because he had heard Alicia say it at dinner once, with the specific warmth people reserve for family they believe in. Her brother, the younger one, the one she had described as still finding his way. He had found his way into her inheritance and out the other side. The gambling markers came next, not difficult to locate once you knew where the money had gone, because money spent on desperation always left a particular kind of trail, frantic and circular, throwing good funds after bad. The amounts were significant. The debts were older than the siphon, which meant the siphon had been built to service the debts, which meant this had been deliberate and sustained, and had required an accomplice inside the company who knew the accounts well enough to forge the paper trail without triggering an alert. He found the employee in the same hour, an accounts manager, 7 years with the company. Alicia had personally advocated for her promotion. He sat with this information for a long time. Then, he called his team and told them to prepare a scorched earth package, every transaction, every forged document, every wire, every marker, every name. He was explaining what he wanted done with it when Alicia walked in. He didn't hear her come in. She heard enough. She looked at the screen, then at him. "My brother," she said. It was not a question. He did not insult her by pretending she had misheard. "Yes." She was quiet for a long time. The kind of quiet that wasn't absence but accumulation. Everything she was feeling compressed into a stillness that cost her more than noise would have. "What are you going to do with it?" she asked. "Whatever you want me to," he said, and meant it absolutely. And she could hear that he meant it, and it frightened her more than the alternative. "I want proof," she said, "the kind that holds in court." He looked at her steadily. "That takes longer." "I know." Her voice did not waver. "Do it the right way." He held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Then he nodded and turned back to the screen and began rebuilding the package around her terms. Not scorched earth. Not the old way. Not the way that left no witnesses and no recourse and no mourning after. Her way. Law. Record. Consequence that would last. It would cost him time he wasn't sure they had. He did it anyway. Because she had asked him to. And because protecting her didn't only mean protecting her body, or her company, or her father's name. It meant protecting the kind of person she was determined to remain. Even now. Even after everything. Especially after everything. The gala was Jiang Wu's idea, which meant it was not really a gala. It was a mechanism. It wore black tie and a string quartet and tables dressed with white orchids, and it raised $4.3 million for a children's literacy foundation in the space of 2 hours, and every single person in that ballroom went home believing they had attended a charitable evening hosted by one of Seoul's most quietly influential banking families. What they had actually attended was an execution. Alicia understood this only in retrospect, piecing it together from the sequence of small, precise moments she'd witnessed without fully reading. The way Jang-woo had moved through the room, like a man who already knew the architecture of every conversation before it began. The way he had paused beside certain men, shaken certain hands, said certain things quietly enough that she couldn't hear from 2 feet away. The way the room's temperature seemed to shift every time he smiled, which he did rarely, and with great deliberateness. The way a surgeon is deliberate with a blade. She was talking to a gallery director about a commission when she saw it happen. Jang-woo had crossed to the gala's live donation board, the kind that displayed contributor names in real time. Elegant gold text scrolling upward as pledges came in, and he made an announcement in the particular tone of a man doing something unremarkable. A matching contribution. His family office would match every pledge made in the next 20 minutes, dollar for dollar, routed through the SEO Park Foundation's newly established endowment fund. Applause. Genuine warmth. A room full of people believing they were watching generosity. What they were watching was a funding structure that, by routing through that specific endowment, triggered automatic co-investment clauses in 3 separate financial instruments. Instruments that Vantage Credit Solutions and its parent entities had signed on to 18 months ago without reading the secondary provisions carefully enough. By the time the matching window closed, the regulatory holds were already processing. She saw it on the face of the man across the room, the one who had laughed on the phone, the one she had begged for 24 hours. Standing near the bar with a champagne glass, he had stopped lifting halfway to his mouth. He was looking at his phone with an expression she recognized because she had worn a version of it herself. The specific blankness of a person receiving information that rearranges the room they thought they were standing in. Jang-woo appeared at his elbow, as if by coincidence. She watched her husband lean slightly toward the man and say something that took 4 seconds. She watched the man go still, in the way prey goes still. She watched him look up from his phone to Jang-woo's face and find nothing there that offered him any exit. And then she watched him nod and extend his hand and shake Jang-woo's with the careful steadiness of someone performing normalcy under enormous pressure. Jang-woo shook it, smiled, moved on. He was at her side 40 seconds later with a fresh glass of wine and the expression of a man who had spent the evening doing nothing more consequential than networking. She looked at him for a long moment. "You planned every inch of tonight," she said. "I planned the donation structure," he said. "The rest is coincidence." "You don't believe in coincidence?" "No," he said. "I don't." She took the wine. Her hand was steady. Inside her chest, something had shifted on its axis. Not fear exactly, or not only fear, but the particular vertigo of standing next to someone and realizing for the first time how much of the ground you'd been standing on was actually them. He terrified her. He was still, somehow, entirely on her side. She didn't know what to do with a truth that contained both of those things at once, so she did what her father had taught her. She squared her shoulders, she reset her expression, and she stood beside her husband in the middle of the room he had just quietly dismantled, and let no one see the earthquake happening behind her eyes. What she did not know, standing there with her wine glass steady and her face composed, was that the men whose accounts were already freezing had made a phone call of their own. That the calculation on their side of the ledger had shifted from pressure to panic. That panic, in men who had spent their careers using other people's desperation as a financial instrument, produced a very specific and predictable response. They took her on a Friday morning, between her car and the building entrance. It was professionally done, not rough, not loud. The specific practiced efficiency of people who had done this before and understood that spectacle created witnesses. A car alongside hers at the light. A door. Two men who were polite about it, in the way that made politeness more frightening than aggression. A bag over her head that smelled like industrial fabric, and zip ties at her wrists. Not painful, just absolute. She breathed. Her father's voice in her head, from a conversation she'd been 12 for and hadn't understood until now. If you are ever in a room you didn't choose, the first thing you do is count. Steps, sounds, time. Turn fear into data. Data is yours. Fear belongs to them. She counted. 47 steps from the car, to a surface that echoed differently. A building, concrete floor, high ceilings. A left turn, then a right, then 11 steps before she was told to stop and sit. She sat. The bag came off. Warehouse. Emergency lighting in a strip along the ceiling. 3 men she didn't recognize. 1 man she did. Her brother stood near the far wall, with his arms crossed, and his eyes doing the thing they'd done since childhood, when he knew he'd broken something sliding away from direct contact. Looking for a peripheral angle that hurt less. She looked at him steadily, until he had to look back. He looked away first. The man who did the talking was not the one who had laughed on the phone. He was above that man. Harder around the eyes, with the specific patience of someone who had learned that waiting was its own form of leverage. He explained the arrangement simply. She would sign the transfer documents, the company would pass to a holding structure his clients controlled, and she would be released unharmed. He used the word unharmed in a way that clarified its opposite. She asked for water. While they found water, she worked the diamond from her wedding ring against the seam of the duct panel behind her. A slow, careful pressure. The kind that looked like nothing. When it caught, she felt it seat into the gap, and she stopped pushing and folded her hands in her lap. She asked for a phone call. She needed to speak to her bank directly, she said, to authorize the transfers. Otherwise they would flag the signatures as coerced, and the documents wouldn't hold. She said this in the level, practical voice of someone trying to make the transaction work. They gave her a phone. She called a number she had memorized months ago. One of Jiang Wu's, not his personal line. The other one. The one with no name attached. She let it ring twice, and hung up. The man watching her interpreted this as a failed connection. Then, she asked to speak with the lead lender's legal representative directly, because she had questions about the transfer structure that needed to be on record before she signed anything. She said on record deliberately, and she watched something flicker in the room, the slight discomfort of men who needed this to be quiet, negotiating against the practical argument that documentation protected them too. They connected her to their legal contact. She spent 40 minutes asking procedural questions she already knew the answers to, in a call routing through a switchboard that Jiang Wu's people had owned for 3 years. Every word recorded. Every admission cataloged. She stretched it with the patience of a woman who had nothing to lose, and was choosing to believe otherwise. Between questions she breathed, and she counted, and she repeated to herself the phrase her father had taught her at 17, when she'd asked him why he always stayed calm in rooms designed to make him feel small. The room belongs to the person who decides when it ends. Somewhere across the city, a phone received a signal. The lights went out at 11:42. Not a flicker, not a gradual dimming. Everything, at once the emergency strip, the exit signs, the red glow of a security panel near the door. Total dark, total silence, and then 2 sounds in very quick succession. A door that had been open clicking shut, and a door that had been locked clicking open. Alicia pressed herself flat against the wall. 3 minutes of sounds she cataloged without seeing a short impact. A longer one. Someone's breath leaving them in a rush. Something heavy meeting the floor with the particular weight of a person who is no longer standing by choice. Professional and sequential and over fast. The way things end when one side of the equation has already solved for every variable. Then, the emergency lighting came back on. Red. The whole room was red. Jiang Wu stood in the center of it. He was not wearing a jacket. His shirt was white, and his collar was open, and the tattoo climbed from his collar toward his jaw, in the red light, like something that had always been there waiting for a room dark enough to finally be visible. There were 3 men on the floor. The man who had done the talking was against the wall with his hands behind him, and an expression that had passed through every stage of negotiation and arrived at compliance. Her brother was in the corner, standing, unhurt, shaking. Jiang Wu's eyes found her. He crossed the room in the particular way he moved when he had stopped performing normalcy. No wasted motion. Absolute direction. The kind of purpose that was older than any front he'd built over it. He crouched in front of her and looked at her face. Her wrists. The small cut on her hand where the diamond had pressed too hard. Nabiol, he said quietly. The name from the contract. The vow name. The one her father had written beside his own signature, in dark ink on heavy paper. She had not known what it meant until now. It meant, the star I navigate by. She held his gaze, and her voice was steady when she said, I'm all right. He stood. He turned to the room, and something changed in him that had nothing to do with his expression. A quality of stillness that was a different stillness than before. One that had a decision underneath it. The kind of decision that certain rooms recognized. The men waiting near the doorway saw it. They had worked for him long enough to know what the stillness meant. One of them met the other's eyes. They waited for the nod. She stood up. She crossed the room to her brother because she needed to do it while she still had the courage. Before the anger or the grief picked a lane, and she lost access to the other one. She looked at him. Really looked, the way you look at someone you have loved for your entire life and are in the process of learning in a new and devastating way. He was crying. She had expected that. He had cried easily since childhood. Tears that came quickly and meant it and changed nothing. He said her name. He said he was sorry. He said he had meant to fix it before it became this, that the debts had compounded faster than he'd calculated, that he had panicked, that he had never intended for anyone to get hurt, that he loved her, that he loved their father's name, that he didn't know how it had become this. She listened to all of it. She let every word land, and she did not flinch away from any of it, and she did not speak until he had run out of language and was just standing there, in the red light, with tears on his face, and nothing left to offer except the truth of how completely he had failed her. There was a part of her, the part that had shared a back seat with him on family road trips. The part that had covered for his mistakes before she understood the cost of covering, that wanted to absorb this too. To find a way to protect him that didn't require what she knew it required. She felt that part of her clearly, acknowledged it fully, and then she set it down. She reached into the pocket of the jacket someone had draped over her shoulders and took out the phone and dialed the prosecutor's number, the one she had put there herself 3 weeks ago, when she had first understood what the evidence might eventually require her to do. Her brother's face changed. Alicia, I love you, she said. I will love you for the rest of my life. She put the phone to her ear. Behind her, she felt rather than heard the shift in the room, the held quality of men waiting on a decision that was not hers to make. She turned without lowering the phone and found Jiang Wu watching her, with his hands at his sides, and an expression she had never seen on him before. Open in a way his face almost never was, as if the person behind everything he had built over 20 years was briefly, quietly visible. His team was watching him. She reached out and put her hand on his wrist. Not pulling, not restraining, just present, just her hand, on his skin, saying, "This is the way. This is who we are. This is the choice." He looked down at her hand. He looked at her. Then he looked at the men behind him and gave the smallest motion of his head, not the nod they had been waiting for, The other one. The one that meant, "Stand down. We're done here." The phone connected. She spoke clearly into it, while her husband stood beside her, with his empire quietly dissolving around him, and chose, for the first time in 20 years, a future that had no shadows in it. It took 4 months. Not the legal process that would take longer, would take its specific grinding institutional time, would produce consequences that held, and records that lasted. 4 months was how long it took Jiang Wu to dismantle everything else. He was methodical about it, in the way he was methodical about everything, which meant it was not visible from the outside, which meant that by the time his rivals understood what was available, they had already moved to claim it, and the question of whether it had been surrendered or seized had become practically unanswerable. He let them have that ambiguity. He had no use for the throne, or the story people told about it. He closed the legal fronts in sequence, starting with the largest. He transferred the legitimate banking assets through clean channels into structures that had no connection to anything that had ever moved sideways. He signed a document witnessed, sealed, held by an attorney, with instructions that were clear and unconditional, that constituted a full accounting of everything he had ever done, every arrangement, every name, every mechanism, to be released automatically if Alicia or anything she had built was ever touched by anyone who had known him in the life before. It was both a confession and a permanent shield. He gave it to her to read before it was sealed. He sat across from her at the kitchen table while she read it, all 12 pages, and he did not look away, or offer commentary, or reach for the version of stillness he used in rooms where he was trying to be unreadable. He let her read him. When she finished, she set it down on the table and looked at the man across from her, not the banking executive, not the tattooed king of a world she'd been protected from knowing, not the stranger her father had saved and shaped into a vow she'd been kept from reading. Just him. The person who had spent years choosing her from inside a life built on choosing nothing. "You're giving up everything," she said. "I'm keeping what matters," he said. She folded her hands over the document. "If we do this," she said, "we do it with nothing I didn't earn myself. The company rebuilds on its own terms. Your money funds it through lawful channels only, disclosed fully, or it doesn't come near it." "Agreed," he said immediately. "And no more rooms I'm not allowed in." He held her gaze. "Agreed." "I mean it, Jiang Wu." "I know," he said. "So do I." They left the apartment on a Thursday morning, with 2 bags each. Not because there was nothing left, there were assets, there was structure, there was the clean money that clean work had earned over years that had always existed alongside everything else. And it was enough, more than enough, to begin with. They left with 2 bags, because beginning required that kind of intention, that specific choice, to feel the lightness rather than immediately replacing weight with weight. The city was clear. Early autumn, the kind of morning that felt newly made. She carried her father's framed letter in the bag on her left shoulder. "What you protect defines you." And she walked beside her husband, on a street where no one watched them, and no unmarked cars followed, and no one on either end of a phone was tracking movements, or flagging accounts, or waiting for a signal. They were, for the first time in their marriage, simply 2 people walking. It was fragile, in the way that true things are fragile, not weak, but honest about what it would take to hold them, requiring presence and choice, and the daily work of people who had decided that the truth between them was worth more than the comfort of well-maintained secrets. It was theirs. Finally, entirely, irreversibly theirs.